Thank you for the introduction. So this is some of the work I did for my master's project at Tennessee Tech back in 2015, 2016. So catfish are important species both commercially and recreationally in Tennessee. They're the third most sought after group of species behind the black bass and crappie. And they're important, as we heard this morning, not only in terms of a harvest-oriented fishery, but also in terms of major potential trophy fishery that likely draws anglers from all over. Catfish in Tennessee have received relatively little attention. There's only been a few major studies conducted, and so we don't know a whole lot about their populations or how to effectively sample them in larger reservoirs in Tennessee. So my study area consisted of 3 large reservoirs on the Tennessee River. Kentucky Lake is the lowermost reservoir. It's the warmest and most eutrophic of my study sites, and it supports the largest commercial and recreational catfish fisheries in Tennessee. Chickamauga is located near Chattanooga. It's a renowned bass fishery, and it also supports the second largest commercial and recreational catfish fisheries in the state. And then finally, Fort Loudon. It's the uppermost impoundment on the Tennessee River. It is the coolest and least eutrophic of the 3 systems, and unlike the other 2 systems, TWA actually has a ban on commercial harvest on Fort Loudon, and there's a consumption advisory advising against eating catfish 2 pounds or greater due to PCB and mercury contamination. So the objectives of this study were first to evaluate whether or not some of the gears that have been deemed the best catfish sampling gears would be effective in Tennessee reservoirs. Secondly, I wanted to compare growth and population characteristics, paying particular attention to how the 2 heavily fished systems compared with the unfished system. And third, I want to model catfish population responses to various minimum and maximum length limit regulations. The current regulation on catfish in Tennessee just restricts the harvest of large catfish to 1 fish over 34 inches per day. So for my methods, we used tandem hoop nets baited with waste cheese for channel catfish. We placed them parallel to structure or shore, and they were deployed for 3 nights. We fished these nets during 3 different seasons, spring, summer, and fall of 2015. And during each season, we put anywhere between 16 and 24 series in each reservoir for a total of 156 series. We used low-frequency electrofishing for blue catfish at 15 pulses per second when water temperatures reached or exceeded 18 degrees Celsius. Electrofished at 72 sites using 5-minute electrofishing intervals. Looking at our second objective there, the growth population characteristics, comparing length frequency among the reservoirs. We also looked at length-weight relationships for channel catfish to describe the robustness of the populations. And then looked at some age-length data using lapilar otoliths and subsample of 10 fish per 25 millimeter length group. And then we assigned ages using an age-length key to anything that wasn't aged. And for the third objective, we estimated these various parameters to put into a FAMS model to model 10, 12, and 14-inch minimum size limit for channel catfish. And then I also wanted to model the number of large trophy-sized blue catfish in the population with 2 different maximum length limits. The current regulation of the 1 fish over 34 inches and a proposed 0 fish over 36-inch harvest. So getting into the results here, I'll start and go through all the results for channel catfish, and then jump into blues after that. Tandem hoop netting, we caught over 3,700 channel catfish, so it was pretty effective. Two-way ANOVA showed significant effects for lake and season, as well as a significant interaction term. So this is just that catch per unit effort depicted graphically. The seasons represented by the 3 clusters of bars. And then within each cluster, the black bar on the left is Kentucky Lake, the center bar is Chickamauga, and the right bar in each is Fort Loudon. We caught significantly more channel catfish in our 10 hoop nets in the spring in both Kentucky Lake and Chickamauga. But Fort Loudon, we caught the most in the summer. Thankfully, our Fort Loudon sample, it was pretty consistently high, and we were able to get a good enough sample and use that for the rest of our analysis moving forward through with the spring sample. So, length frequency distributions were all significantly different. A couple of things that I thought were more important to note here. Kind of what you'd expect to see from reading the literature. We didn't see many small channel catfish less than 225 millimeters, and we saw relatively few large channel catfish as well, up over 600 millimeters. And also, so Fort Loudon, that's the unfished population, where we think there's higher density of fish there, and that you don't have quite the peak on that distribution, and it's a little more truncated. So. We ran weight length regressions on the log transform data for each lake. Initially, we tested the slopes of the regressions, and they weren't significantly different. And then we went and tested the elevations, and they were all significantly different from one another. And essentially what that's telling us in the more biological terms is channel catfish of a given length in Kentucky Lake was about 10% heavier on average than a fish in Fort Loudon, and about 6% heavier on average than a fish in Chickamauga. Getting into the von Bertalanffy growth curve here, we saw faster growth in Kentucky Lake and Chickamauga Lake versus Fort Loudon Lake, where we saw slower growth and much older fish. The age ranges we saw were 2 to 12 years old in Kentucky Lake, 3 to 15 in Chickamauga, and then 3 to 21-year-olds in Fort Loudon. And we compiled all this into our age frequency distributions and estimated annual mortality with catch curve analysis. Our estimate was 61% annual mortality for Kentucky Lake. Did the similar thing with Chickamauga, 27% annual mortality. And once again for Fort Loudon, we saw about 18% annual mortality. And so something to remember here with Fort Loudon being the unfished population, we suspect that is essentially all natural mortality there. And then performed yield per recruit modeling just to look to see if there was potential for growth overfishing happening. And in Kentucky Lake, we used on all the lakes, we used this 10, 12, and 14-inch minimum length limit regulation. But Kentucky Lake here specifically, we see a little bit of potential for some growth overfishing as exploitation reaches or exceeds the 0.25 mark. With a 10-inch minimum. So increasing a minimum or implementing a minimum at higher levels of exploitation could potentially ameliorate some of that growth overfishing potential. On Chickamauga, there's relatively little chance for growth overfishing at the 10-inch minimum length limit there. We started to see maybe some if exploitation got up around 0.35, 0.4. And that again could be if we saw that level of exploitation that could be ameliorated with a length limit. So, and there's almost no chance that any growth overfishing would be occurring in Fort Loudon. We expect exploitation to be extremely low, and probably even a little bit of stunting or extremely dense, underutilized population there. All right, and so switching over to blue catfish, we caught a whopping 230 blues with low-frequency electrofishing. And I put limited success just to try and be a little bit optimistic, but our low-frequency electrofishing was pretty bad. There were a few sites that just kind of stood out and we caught fish at, but the majority of them, it was no fish. So I was kind of curious. So we did augment our blue catfish sample. This is just a collective length frequency for all reservoirs separated up by gears. We got fish from trout lines, hoop nets, gill nets, and even a few rod and reel fish. Our blue catfish age range was 1 to 17-year-old in Kentucky Lake, 2 to 18 in Chickamauga, and 3 all the way up to 37 in Fort Loudon. And we see a similar pattern here that we saw with channel catfish growth, where Kentucky Lake and Chickamauga showed faster growth and slower growth in Fort Loudon with much older fish. And so then I modeled the number of trophy blue catfish in the population under these maximum length limit scenarios, the current being the 1 fish over 34, and the proposed essentially is a 0 fish over 36 limit. And so what I did was, the fish recruit to the fishery here at about 4 years of age, and they experience this level of fishing mortality until they hit that mark where they come up against the maximum size limit. And I ran 3 variations of the current limit where that limit is slightly, moderately, and extremely effective at reducing fishing mortality. And then I compared those numbers, the population numbers, to the 0 over 36 change. And in almost every situation, it would result in a significant reduction in the number of trophy blue catfish in the population. And then in the most extreme cases, I think we actually had reductions of upwards of 25%. So if the current regulation is extremely effective at reducing the fishing mortality, and they were to switch it, that would not bode well for the number of trophy blue catfish in the population. So to sum up, our tandem hoop nets effectively captured channel catfish. Seems like something that we could use in Tennessee reservoirs. I had very limited success putting it nicely with low frequency electrofishing, but there were some instances where it worked, so hopefully a little more research there, and it might be utilized more in the future. Growth and population characteristics, blue catfish and channel catfish appear to have similar growth patterns, growing faster in Kentucky Lake and Chickamauga, and slower in Fort Loudon, but reaching much greater ages. And channel catfish in Kentucky Lake were significantly more robust than in the other systems. And finally, there is the potential to ameliorate any growth overfishing that could be going on with some minimum length limits for channel catfish, but until we have a better estimate of actual exploitation, probably not a good idea or not necessary to implement those. And then the shift in the maximum length limits from the current regulation to a 0 fish over 36 regulation could significantly reduce the number of trophy blues in the populations. Thank Tennessee Wildlife Resources, USGS, Tennessee Tech, and my co-author over there, who I didn't put on the title slide, Mark. And I'll take any questions.
Any questions? In the back?
Hey Cole,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a hard question.
Oh, great. Let's hear it.
Because you left me off the title slide.
Yep. I had it coming.
You did this work as a graduate student, and now you work for the agency. Has your perspective changed in how you interpret results? The data are what they are. Modeling is what it is. What about how you talk to an audience?
I mean, I guess, I don't know if I'm going to get at your question or not here, but I think being in the position I'm in now, it's opened my eyes a lot more to the human dimensions kind of aspect of what's going on than maybe what I had when I was looking specifically at the modeling and at the numbers in grad school. So I would say I would probably communicate it a little bit differently, but holding true to what the numbers say. Does that? I'm all over the place, Mark.
No, that's good.
Okay.
Hey, Cole.
Hey,
Nice to see you again.
you too.
And I apologize for being late at the beginning of your talk, and so you may have covered this, so if you already did, I apologize for being late. So I have my own ideas of why there's no exploitation law on Loudon, but can you expand upon that a little bit?
So on Fort Loudon, there's the commercial fishing ban, and there's a consumption advisory from TDEC that says not to consume anything over 2 pounds because of contamination like PCBs and mercury. No, that's fine.
In the back?
Maybe this is related to Cindy's question. Do you have confidence in your mortality estimates with the catch curves? And if so, how do you explain that wildly different mortality? Maybe I missed it, 60% annual, like 15%.
So I guess I would say I do question the mortality estimates a little bit with Kentucky Lake being as high as they are, especially with Chickamauga being very similar in terms of the actual harvest. I guess I would personally expect it to be lower, but I feel pretty confident in our mortality estimate for Fort Loudon being a pretty good baseline natural mortality estimate.
Got a minute and a half.
So if you can't harvest fish at Fort Loudon, growth's terrible, what are the management plans for the catfish at Loudon? I mean, it seems like we're spending resources doing management there, but you can't harvest the catfish, so I'm wondering.
Well, we included that in the study just to make sure we got a good baseline. We knew that would likely represent our natural mortality for the unfished population. And the goal of some of this was to look at the potential for growth overfishing happening. With those consumption advisories and the ban on commercial fishing.
Is there potential for the consumption advisory to be lifted?
Not that I know of at this time. I don't have any recent data on PCB or mercury levels.
Real quick on that. And in any of your samples, any of those reservoirs, did you find any early excursion and put back in?
Not in any of my samples.
Okay.
Nope.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Cole.